Hello everybody. In this presentation I want to say a few things about multi-robot planning. So we can, in particular we're going to have a look at hierarchical planning, cooperative planning, and then to a certain degree execution monitoring. So let's start out with hierarchical planning, which is is popularly done through hierarchical task networks. So those hierarchical task network planning problems consist of initial state description, an initial task network as an objective to be achieved. So think about, oh, I want to plan a trip from here to somewhere warm in Florida or something like this. And then domain knowledge consisting of networks of primitive and compound tasks. So that's the idea that we have a very, very high level problem description a lot of times, or task network. And then we need to know how to decompose it into smaller and smaller tasks. Initially, they might be compound tasks, and further refine them until we have primitive tasks. Here's an example of how those might look like in the context of gaming. So we have this HDN domain where we have a task network over here. Again, this one is in the context of gaming. There are many other things that they need to worry about that we won't worry about. But here's just sort of an example of a hierarchical task network. So again, the hierarchy of tasks, each of which can be executed, but again with the caveat that we first have to decompose them in more primitive tasks. So the planning process then starts by decomposing the initial task network and continues until all compound tasks are decomposed into primitive tasks. And so the solution is a plan consisting of primitive tasks applicable to the initial state of the world. So that works well. However, it is a fairly centralized way of planning, and this is not the way we want to go with this project. So again, we could do this, and then when we have these primitive tasks, we can sort of like figure out which task could be assigned to which robot. So instead, we'll have a look at an approach in which robots cooperate to solve a plan. And so as such, giving the robots considerably more power. So rather than the robots being told, you do this, they sort of like develop their own plans and then coordinate and cooperate. So we'll have a look at what is called multi-agent planning approaches. And as you might imagine, a key aspect of that is communication and cooperative coordination. So this is some work that is not necessarily covered in some of the key textbooks, at least because partly they're kind of 10 years old by now and they're working on a revision. So that gives you a sense of how quickly this field actually evolves and changes. So I was able to find a paper, though, that's pretty good. That's an introduction to a special issue on multi-agent planning. And so I have it linked up on our webpage, and here's also a reference to it. So the authors, Wirth and Clemens, sort of distinguish or point out in their introduction that there are the following phases that can be distinguished. We might allocate goals to agents. That kind of makes sense. Again, we might refine goals into subtasks. We would schedule subtasks by adding resource allocation and timing constraints. This is not necessarily something that we have to worry about in our domain of cleaning, but certainly if you have to produce a widget, there are certain processes that have to follow if there's a mechanical device that processes them. And again, there are timing constraints, so think about a refinery. I mean, it's very important that we know about those things. Then there's a phase of communicating planning choices to recognize and resolve conflicts, and then there's a way to execute plans. Now this is sort of like fairly linear, but as the authors point out, we can mix and match these things a little bit. Well, that's not quite right, but we can combine things a little bit. So typically the planning is a combination of phases 2 and 3, which are often interleaved. Refine subtasks, schedule subtasks according to resource allocation, paying attention to constraints. Not all phases need to be included. Maybe there's no common or global goals. So if there's a none, then we do not need to do any allocation. All right, that makes sense. But here's the more interesting thing. We can combine the different phases. So for example, agents can coordinate their plans while constructing their plans. So we would combine phases 2, 3, and 4. So now we truly sort of go to a cooperative approach refine, schedule, communicate. So we'll sort of combine these things and and communicate our choices. Another way to look at it is the agents do get their tasks, they do their planning individually, and then later on they sort of say, okay, well, this is my plan, so this is what we're going to be doing, and they may execute things more like on the execution side. So notice that the first one was sort of like trying to come up with consistent plans as much as possible by communicating during the scheduling and planning phase, and then the other one is sort of like postponing that a little bit, so like coming up with some rudimentary plans, say, and then doing communication and even doing execution, so like pay attention to each other and resolve any conflicts. As the authors say, Wirth and Clemens, in general, any interleaving of the 5 phases may make sense. So a nice approach to planning. When it comes to goal and task allocation, again, there are centralized methods. We have already briefly talked about hierarchical task networks, and then there are different ways in which robots can bid for tasks. So again, we can simply say, even without hierarchical task networks, you can say, robot 1, you do this, robot 2, you do this. So there might be some sort of like centralized assignment, and then the rest is being left up to the robots, or the robots can bid for their tasks. So that works too. So again, we have seen there are many different phases. Well, there are many different ways to combine the phases. So let's suppose that a robot is assigned a task, and each robot develops its own plan. So then they might submit their plans, and it might be helpful to coordinate them. So again, there's a centralized way to do that. We can run them through some sort of like partial goal planner that looks at things and coordinates things. Other things that we can simply merge them, and as part of that one, so like resolve any conflicts or overlaps. But again, robots may also be able to coordinate their plans without centralized control, so they can inform each other about their plans and coordinate them accordingly. There's this idea that was presented in this paper, well, that was mentioned in the paper, that's called social laws. So just like we know about social distancing, obviously with or without COVID-19, we don't want to invade people's space too much. And so we can sort of like use some of those ideas for the robots to plan their actions. Again, in our system, each robot is the same. They're very homogeneous. But we can imagine situations where there are robots with different abilities. So in that case, we may have to know about interdependencies among the robots. So execution, again, agents may cooperate during their planning phases by communicating goals and partial plans. But so maybe we'll sort of say, now we'll sort of like do some rudimentary planning to these things, and we sort of like resolve conflicts during execution. So again, depending on the amount of cooperation during the phases 2 and 3, then once we sort of like start executing, we may have to do some replanning. Okay? So it depends on how much they communicated the details of their plans. So there may be some replanning that is necessary. Another reason for replanning is that robots may fail. Okay? So that's all I have for this one over here. Not a lot of technical information, but again, that's all like, well, at least in textbooks, is not mentioned that much. So what I decided to do instead is, once I post the assignment, I will have another video in which I say a few things about what to do. Also, this portion of the assignment, again, feel free to work on this one in pairs. It's a little bit of a research assignment. I will certainly have some portions that are fairly prescribed, but then I'll leave some of the solution approaches up to you. All right, I will see you then. Bye.